Hi everyone, my name is Jackie Berknes-Gartman. I'm a GI and liver pathologist at Johns Hopkins. And today I'm going to be going over another interesting GI pathology case. So today we're going to be talking about oxyntic gland adenoma, which is a fairly uncommon polyp that we see in the stomach, typically in the fundus or the cardia. So going to very low magnification here, we can see that this is a polyp that was serially sectioned and placed on this slide. We can see the margin here. We have our lateral margins here, our deep margin here. In some of these other pieces, we can't really see the margin too well. So the first thing that I'm seeing at very low magnification is that we have this really interesting architecture where we have all these glands that kind of look like they're flowing into each other. And this we refer to as an anastomosing pattern. And I can see that this is located in the mucosa, but it seems to be kind of in the deeper portion of the mucosa as opposed to at the mucosal surface. And as I go to this other piece over here, I see the same pattern where again I have these complex anastomosing glands that are located in the mucosa, but don't really seem to be extending to the surface, which has some reactive changes. So let's go to higher magnification to look at these interesting anastomosing glands. And here I can see that these glands are lined by columnar to cuboidal cells. Here they kind of look more columnar. They have a very basophilic or purple appearance to them, so this is an example of chief cell differentiation in this lesion. I do have a little bit of parietal cell differentiation, so if I zoom in here, I can see a couple of parietal cells that are in these complex anastomosing glands. And as I scroll around a little bit, I do get different types of glands. I'm going to actually go to my other piece of tissue here that looks a little bit different in some areas. So here I still see my very purple-looking cells, but in areas like this, again, I start to see some more parietal cells. So to summarize, these complex anastomosing glands are lined by a combination of, in this case, predominantly chief cells, but some degree of parietal cells. You can see a couple more in here. So those are the characteristic features of an oxyntic gland adenoma, the anastomosing architecture, and they can have these varying degrees of chief cell and parietal cell differentiation, which can lead to either a more purple appearance if they have predominantly chief cells, or a pinker appearance if they have more parietal cells. I don't actually grade these just because there isn't really criteria to grade them as low versus high grade. These lesions can go on to turn into adenocarcinomas if they invade the submucosa, and in that case it's referred to as adenocarcinoma of a fundate gland type, but that tends to behave indolently. So we're going to just very briefly look at the interface here between the mucosa and submucosa in this polyp. And I can see that there's an area where this gland kind of looks like it's dipping downward. Maybe it's going through the muscularis mucosae. But I don't really see any associated desmoplastic or fibrotic stromal response. So I'm interpreting this as just a little bit of mucosal prolapse, which is something that can occur in these lesions. So to summarize, I would call this an oxyntic gland adenoma. In this case, it does look like it's approaching our deep margin here. This is just a bit more prolapse over here. It looks like our lateral margins here, our mucosal margins are negative. This is just oxyntic mucosa, and I don't see any invasion. So in terms of how these would behave with immunohistochemistry, they're typically positive for MUC6 while negative for MUC5AC. I don't typically do those stains. It's more of an H&E diagnosis, but those can be helpful if you're not sure. In terms of molecular features, these tend to harbor GNAS mutations, which is similar to a more common type of polyp, which is pyloric gland adenoma. And as I mentioned, these can turn into these very indolent behaving adenocarcinomas of fundate gland type. So because of that, I typically will recommend that these be completely excised, but that is sufficient management for these. So that's our brief discussion of oxyntic gland adenoma today. Thank you for listening.